Welcome back. Thanks for staying with us. You're watching Closing Bell East Africa. Well, 32 African countries are spending more on paying external debts than they do on healthcare, a pattern that is likely to trigger massive debt default. Well, a consortium of charities are today warning that high debt servicing costs are preventing Global South governments from spending on vital public services such as education and health and making investments to limit the impact of the climate emergency. CNBC Africa is now joined by Jason Braganza from Aphrodad, the Executive Director. Many thanks for joining us, Jason. You just released a new report that has some very startling statistics on Ethiopia.
Abi, thank you so much for having me. Yes, indeed, Aphrodad, together with its partners, the Horn Economic and Social Policy Institute, HESPI, and Debt Justice UK, have recently launched a report in the week of the World Economic Forum just to highlight the plight of countries like Ethiopia that have entered a debt restructuring program with its creditors following the inability of the country to pay off its debt. And the case of Ethiopia, which is very similar to that of countries like Zambia, where I'm joining you from, and Ghana, that have also entered this process, is that the faith within which the creditors are negotiating with the Ethiopian officials tends not to be in good faith. And what we've seen in the initial rounds of negotiations, a deal that was struck or that was being negotiated between the government of Ethiopia and its creditors has been rejected by the creditors, despite the creditors due to make a profit from this restructuring exercise. Bondholders who bought bonds when they were first issued would make a 24% profit, and those who bought bonds more recently would make a profit of around 38%. So you can see that the negotiation phase that the government of Ethiopia is going through and the faith within which its creditors are entering these negotiations are actually quite dangerous and alarming for a country like Ethiopia, where it's now having to also take significant regressive monetary and exchange rate policy decisions.
Well put, Jason. So what does the road ahead look like? Are you calling for debt cancellation? What sort of policies should be put in place to tackle this?
So for a long time now, organizations like HESPI, Aphrodad, and Debt Justice UK, and a wide range of other civil society organizations have argued that the current debt restructuring framework that was initiated by the G20, called the Common Framework, is actually not fit for purpose. And this is the process that Ethiopia has entered. And we can see also the protracted nature of the negotiations here in Zambia, that this is not working. So what we're calling for, first and foremost, is a complete overhaul of this common framework. And in the interim, as this common framework is being assessed and reviewed, that there is what we call a debt standstill or a debt service suspension. You may remember during COVID, there was something like this that was introduced, a debt service suspension initiative, yes, which sort of suspended debt servicing during the COVID-19 period. So we are calling for one of these types of debt service suspensions while we try and figure out what is the most progressive, from the borrowing country's point of view, debt restructuring mechanism. We're also very fortunate that there have been some very good proposals put forward for debt restructuring by UNCTAD. They are calling for a global debt authority, and civil society organizations that are calling for a UN framework convention on sovereign debt that would sort of democratize the negotiation of debt restructuring. We're also very lucky that this year the Catholic Church has declared 2025 a Jubilee year, and this means that in certain circumstances we are going to be calling for debt cancellation, where the debt burden just seems very high for countries. And as you mentioned in your introduction, close to 30% of African countries are paying more in debt servicing than they are investing in social services.
Quite very alarming numbers that you talked about, Jason. And finally, what sort of risks linger for countries like Ethiopia, a country that is regarded as the tiger of Africa?
There are several. They range from, political risks, social and economic, and all of these are intertwined. With countries like Ethiopia paying more in debt servicing than they are in investing in things like education, health, water, and food, you're likely to start seeing the marginalization of society and its citizens being able to access these basic goods and services.
All right.
When you start seeing that, government is going to have a difficult time to be able to control the social unrest that might emerge as a result of this. And we've seen examples of what debt pressures tend to do in countries in terms of their political and social stability. Just up the road or down the road from Ethiopia and Kenya, just last year, the Maandamano demonstrations were largely as a result of Kenya's heavily indebtedness and the debt burden that translated in a very regressive finance bill and forced people onto the streets to protest that finance bill. We saw something similar in Uganda. We've seen it in Nigeria, in Bangladesh, and in Argentina. So the debt pressures are likely to put huge social and social stability pressures in countries. Economically, it's likely to regress the productive capacity of the economy because resources are being diverted towards debt servicing rather than investments in the productive sector. And so there's a dependence on foreign investment, on foreign direct investment, on aid. And so countries will be put into another vicious cycle or poverty trap as a result of this debt crisis if we do not find a more comprehensive debt restructuring deal for countries like Ethiopia.
All right. Thank you so much, Jason Braganza, for those very deep insights. And we certainly hope this will translate into action at a policy level. Well, let's take you to another conversation.